Our program here tonight is How is Arlington Impacted by Changes in Federal Immigration Enforcement? And this is part one of a two-part series. And indeed, the topic of immigration enforcement is a hot and very contentious one right now. There, to my knowledge, has not been any change in U.S. law on the matter, but the Trump administration has changed enforcement priorities and policies from those of the prior Obama administration. Coupled with some changes at enforcement on entry points and an overall political environment that can probably best be described as heated, this topic has led to a fair amount of emotion and a good amount of confusion across the nation, and Arlington is no different. Federalism plays a role here. Immigration and naturalization are powers expressly given to our federal government in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 of the U.S. Constitution. But most of our interactions with government are with local government, schools, cops, parks, and the like, all of whom are established under their state's laws, not federal statute, in accordance with the 10th Amendment. So how does this relationship factor in? What is the impact of the federal changes on Arlington County operations? What happens when Arlington County receives a request from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, colloquially known as ICE? What impacts are our educators observing amongst families in Arlington public schools? What are local government's responsibilities under federal law, if any, in this domain? And what is required of them and what are they responsible for under Commonwealth law? What happens if these two sovereigns conflict? And so that is what we are going to explore this evening, how the relationship between these levels of government operates and how that impacts the community. In November, we're going to look at our public and civic sector and look at how private sector community groups are feeling the same change. To be clear, this program is not a pro-con debate on the federal immigration enforcement changes themselves. There have been, and I'm sure will continue to be, many programs dealing with this subject, as I expect it will be on the forefront of our political radar for quite some time. And it will be approached from many angles. But what we here at Committee of 100 want to do, taking our Arlington community lens, is look at how our community is responding to what is happening. In this sense, we are doing what our community and what our local government must do. Treat the federal changes as given and respond accordingly. ICE doesn't take direction from Arlington County, and so how are they responding? We will look at that in that light. And to help us through this, we have invited 3 speakers for our program. 1 to provide some background on the issue, and 2 representing local government services. From the government, we have very intentionally invited staff members who are leading and working on the topic day in and day out, and who can speak to that day in and day out experience. First, though, we will hear from Simon Sandoval-Moshenberg, Legal Director of the Legal Aid Justice Center. And while the Legal Aid and Justice Center does have advocacy operations, we have asked Simon here to join us to provide a deeper understanding of what the current situation is on the ground for immigrants, their families, and those who serve them. Having lived abroad myself, I was much more aware of the rules and requirements and restrictions on me when I was myself a non-citizen, and certainly I noticed that I was much more aware there than my citizen friends were, or that I am about the rules here where I am a citizen. So it'll be great to hear from Simon about that perspective. Next, Dr. Laura Newton, the Director of Student Services for Arlington Public Schools, will join us. She's from the Office of Student Services, which provides system-wide services in psychology, social work, and counseling, and works with staff members across all of our school system to provide assistance to our students. And finally, representing the Arlington County Sheriff's Department, we will welcome Deputy Sheriff David Kidwell. While the police are our primary law enforcement organization. The Sheriff's Office has responsibility that includes management of the county detention facility, colloquially the county jail, oversight of the courthouse and courtroom security, transportation of inmates to court, state facilities, medical and other appointments, as well as service of summons, court orders, and other civil process. We are fortunate to have wonderful insight this evening. I look forward, of course, to the Q&A that is always spirited here at Committee 100. But first, to begin, please join me in welcoming Simon Sandoval-Moshenberg.
Thank you very much. So my name is Simon Sandoval-Moshenberg. I'm the legal director of the Immigrant Advocacy Program at the Legal Aid Justice Center. We're a statewide organization. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. We're based out of Charlottesville. We have also offices in Richmond and in Falls Church. I'm in our Falls Church office. So I grew up in Arlandria, the Arlandria neighborhood, which is just south, a 4-mile run from Arlington. It's a historically Salvadoran and Honduran neighborhood. And obviously, I've been around this community for a lot less time than many of the people in this room. But at least for my lifetime, Arlington is currently less diverse and has less of a foreign-born population, both as an overall percentage of its population and also just in terms of pure numbers, than basically at any time in my life. So right there, even just right there, we see that the question of immigration and how it impacts Arlington is intimately tied up and can't be separated from the question of affordable housing, right? Thank you. Sorry, I need to speak up a bit, apparently. Right, so for example, in 2000, Arlington had the highest proportion of Latino residents of any DC area jurisdiction, right? Whereas in 2010, the Latino population of Arlington was down to 15% of the population, right? Even in 2000, Arlington was 30% foreign-born. In 2016, is down to 20% foreign-born. So as the sort of laws and policies of the Arlington County government become more and more welcoming to immigrants and more immigrant-friendly, fewer and fewer immigrants actually get to benefit and enjoy those policies because fewer and fewer immigrants can actually afford to live in this county. So presently, the undocumented population of Arlington, right? So we have the foreign-born population, and many of those have become citizens, and many of those have green cards, and many of those have no legal status whatsoever, right? And so that's the undocumented population. The undocumented population of Arlington right now is estimated at 17,000, which is it's a really large population, but it's actually fewer even than Loudoun County, for example. There are more undocumented residents in Loudoun than there are in Arlington. One of the most important, if you look at United States history, what we see in terms of immigration policy is that every 10 or 20 years, there is a legalization program of some sort, right, that gives people the opportunity to come out of the shadows and obtain a path to some sort of legal status, right? Most undocumented people, out of every, say, 20 undocumented people in my personal professional experience, 1 out of every 20 undocumented people is undocumented because they haven't yet gotten the right legal advice. They haven't yet met a lawyer who can really help them. 19 out of 20 undocumented people are undocumented because there is no path for them to obtain legal status under the law, no matter how good the lawyer is, right? Even if you've got Atticus Finch, there is no path for them, right? So most undocumented people need some sort of legalization program in order to become legal. And that happens, right? And so there was obviously a large legalization program in 1986 under President Reagan, right? In my adult life, the main legalization program that we have had is the DACA program. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. DACA was announced by President Obama in the middle of 2012. And the basic parameters, of course, you know, as with all legal things, the devil's in the details. But the basic legal parameters for who qualified for DACA is immigrants without any other form of legal status who were brought to the United States, who came to the United States below the age of 16, prior to their 16th birthday, and prior to 5 years ago, as of the date of the announcement of the program, so prior to the middle of 2007. So Obama basically drew sort of two red lines and carved, or I guess four, and carved out a box. And if you came to the United States below the age of 16 and prior to the middle of 2007, you could apply for legal status through the DACA program. And many, many, many people did, right? So 800,000 people nationwide were beneficiaries of DACA. In Virginia alone, excuse me, in Virginia alone, it's about 12,000 young people who qualified for legal status through DACA. At Northern Virginia Community College alone, there are 700 students with DACA. At George Mason alone, there are 400 students with DACA. So huge numbers of young people, right? And most of these folks, some applied late, but most of these 800,000 people have now had legal status for 5 years now, right? Because this program has been in existence for 5 years. So what have they done in these 5 years? I mean, they've done tremendous things. For one thing, thanks to a decision by Attorney General Mark Herring 2 years into the DACA program, students with DACA are eligible for in-state tuition. So what we saw when that decision came down is large numbers of them who'd been paying out-of-state tuition, even though they went through basically the entire public education system, definitely high school, in Virginia, in Arlington. They were paying out-of-state tuition, which basically meant they were taking 1 or 2 classes a semester at Nova, because that's all they could afford. Large numbers of them transferred to four-year colleges. And many of them are still in the four-year colleges, and many of them have graduated by now, right? Because this program's been in existence for 5 years now. Many of them are working as professionals. So I'll tell the story of one young woman who Dr. Violen Sanchez knows well. A Yorktown High School graduate of class of 2012. She didn't even know she was undocumented until she was in the 9th grade, right? I mean, she came over to the country at such a young age that she really kind of didn't have any idea what was going on. And it wasn't until she was in the 9th grade that her parents told her, you know, you don't have papers in this country. And the context in which they told her is that she started to develop an interest in computer science. And they basically, almost as a way of telling her, don't get your hopes up, young lady. They told her, you know what, you're undocumented in this country, so maybe this computer science thing isn't going to be for you, right? When she graduated from high school, DACA didn't even exist yet, right? So she received full scholarships to certain schools, but she couldn't claim it because she had no legal status. She had to pay, again, out-of-state tuition, which was $20,000 per year, in excess of what the in-state tuition was, even though she'd gone through the entire school system in this country. With DACA, though, she was able to graduate on time, and she's now a software developer at a Fortune 500 company in Tyson's Corner, right? And there's plenty of examples of folks like this. So what is the biggest change in federal immigration policy and enforcement that there's been? And I think this would be fair to describe this as a change in the law, is that on Tuesday of last week, President Trump formally rescinded this DACA program, right? So unfortunately, since the DACA program was created by executive action by Obama, it could be undone by executive action by the next guy. A law passed by Congress obviously would have to be undone by a law passed by Congress, but generally speaking, what one president does can be undone by the next president. And this president, basically, that seems to be his entire plan, is to just undo everything that the previous president did. And one of those things is DACA. So we are now facing the specter of 800,000 people nationwide losing their legal status that they've had for 5 years now, right? So I was actually thinking, kind of trying to go back in history, trying to remember another example of when mass numbers of legal immigrants are going to be made illegal by a change in law. And the only thing I could think of was like the Bracero program and Operation Wetback under the Eisenhower administration, right? So we are facing something that we have not seen since the Eisenhower administration in terms of the effect of a change in policy that, unless Congress gets its act together and passes some sort of real legislative dream act, starting in March, so President Trump did give it sort of a 6-month basically delay. He kicked the can down the road by 6 months. But starting on March 6th, these kids will start to lose their legal status one by one over the course of the next 2 years. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done with regards to persuading us, especially the Virginia delegation, to do something about this. Obviously, our representatives here in this area are strong supporters of the DREAM Act, but Representative Goodlatte, who is a Virginia representative, is probably one of the human beings who is most personally responsible for preventing a DREAM Act from having been passed in the past. There's lots more we can say about that, but basically we're looking at, the one more thing I want to add in there is to add insult to injury, right? So we have a president who came into office saying that he hated illegal immigration and is now poised to create 800,000 more undocumented immigrants. Well, guess what? There's another population of 300,000 people who have a legal status that's called temporary protected status, or TPS. These are people specifically from the countries of El Salvador and Honduras. By definition, they've had their legal status since 2001. And as you might imagine, a disproportionate number of them live in Northern Virginia, because that's what we have here, is Salvadorans and Hondurans, right? So if you're keeping track, 800,000 plus 300,000 is 1.1 million, right? So unless Congress does something, and unless we all get together to make Congress do something, there will be 1.1 million more undocumented immigrants 1 year into the Trump administration than there were to begin with.
Thank you, Simon. And now from Arlington Public Schools, Lara Newton.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I am Laura Newton, and I'm from Arlington Public Schools. I'm the Director of Student Services. We have heard in the last weeks, with very concern, the news coverage of incidents that have happened in Charlottesville, and also the Trump administration announcement of their decision to terminate the Deferred Action Childhood Arrival, known as DACA. And as educators, we're really concerned about the impact that this will have in our students and our families. At APS, we really want to make sure that everybody knows that we are open and welcome, and we want all our families to enroll in school regardless of their immigration status. It's the beginning of the school year, and in years past, when I was working in other counties, that was a big issue. Kids were, and families were afraid, and kids were not registering in school. So that's a big issue. We need to make sure that people know that we are a welcoming and open county, and that we will not stop anybody from registering regardless of their immigration status. I'm sorry, I do have an accent if you have not noticed, so I hope that I don't get nervous, because when I do get nervous, it gets thicker. So let's hope that I don't get nervous. Okay, so let's talk about the mission and vision of Arlington Public Schools. It is obvious that we clearly state that we have a pledge to help all our students, and we want them prepared to be responsible and productive citizens. That's the labor, that's the issue, that's what we want to do in education. Regardless of your background, we want to make sure that you get an education. So you cannot, be better than your family. And I know that a lot of immigrants' families that are here really come with the idea, with the dream that, okay, I'm making an effort and I'm sacrificing to be here, but my child will do so much better than me. And if they get here young, they will learn English, and they will not have an accent like me, and they will be able to communicate with all of you without getting nervous. Okay, so our core values are excellence, integrity, diversity, collaboration. So we really want to celebrate our diversity and our individual differences in our community. We want to make sure that our students are respected no matter where they go, and we want to promote opportunities to each one of them. We know that everybody has a talent. We just have to find what that talent is and really work at it. So we have, future engineers, future lawyers, and doctors. I know that I speak on behalf of the school board members and the superintendent and staff that we want to make sure that our students do come to school and they get registered. It is important that everybody knows that we do not ask about legal immigration status with anybody. We don't keep that information. The federal law does not require us to ask for that information. And you can look and see that the 1982 Supreme Court ruling indicates that we cannot deny access to any child, whether they're here legally or not. So kids can come in and register, and we will not ask if they have immigration papers or not. And certainly we will not withdraw anybody because they don't have documentation. We also want to know that the students' information is confidential. We're not going to share any information in their files with anybody unless we have reason to do so if a parent gives consent, because we have a legal responsibility to protect students' privacy. And our harassment and bullying policy is very clear. We do not allow discrimination, bullying, or any disrespectful behavior in our schools. I want to emphasize that we want the student safety to be our priority because we want our students to be coming to school every day. Attendance is important, and if the students are afraid or the families are afraid, they're not going to send the kids to school, and therefore there'll be no learning, and that would be our number one concern. We want to create a place of learning and welcoming where everybody feels welcome. We believe in the American dream. All our students are part of the American dream. Our dreamers, DACA, those students have dreams. They want to go to schools and they want to have a better life. So we want to make sure that we are going to support, just like Brian, and make sure that they are able to graduate and make their dreams come true. Dr. Murphy has been consistent in his message to our families and to our schools. And he wants everybody to know that they're welcome and that he reminded everybody we have to be kind, we have to be respectful, we have to be hopeful. It's not our place to judge what are the reasons why you're here. Our role is really to educate you. Back in April, there still were concerns about what do we do about immigration and what do we tell the families? Because again, we are concerned that families will not send their kids because they feel like they're going to come into school and they are going to be taken away from the parents. So our number one concern is that parents feel that schools are safe, that if they send their kids to school, they're not going to be taken away. If you're 18 or 17 or for whatever reason. Our parents need to be engaged in their parents' education. Research shows that the students do better when their parents are involved in their education. If the parents stop coming to school, then we're going to have an issue. We want them to feel that they can reach out to our principals, they can reach out to our counselors, substance abuse counselors, social workers for help. We want them to join the PTA, and we want to create, information sessions where they can come in and get the information that they need. We have translation services, so if they don't speak English, that should not be a deterrent from them to coming to see us. And we always communicate all our events that we have in school jar, peach jar, flyers. We continue to work with Arlington County schools. With Arlington County, and we do have an immigration source website where parents can go and really find out about their rights, frequently asked questions, and any other resources that we have in the community. As we start the new year, we want to make sure that families feel valued, that students feel welcome. It is our goal to make sure that students feel safe and respected and that they can share their concern with us. We have a whole child strategic goal, and that means that we want to ensure that each child is healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. Thank you.
And now from the Arlington Sheriff's Office, David Kidwell.
Actually, I'm here on behalf of the Sheriff of Arlington, Beth Arthur. She's actually been sheriff for 17 years now and been with our department, the Sheriff's Office, for 31. And she told me not to mess up tonight or I wouldn't have a job tomorrow. This is a very hot topic and very important topic to her. She is unable to attend. She's at a Virginia Sheriff's Association meeting in Williamsburg and sent the B team in, so here I am. The great thing about it is I ran the jail for the last 10 years, so I know a little bit about the topic, and we'll be able to answer most of your questions. I did Google, I Googled federal immigration policy and enforcement before I came here, and there were 6.3 million hits that responded. And I'll try to cover all those topics in the next 10 minutes. What I'd like to do, we're going to talk about the two major impacts of this federal immigration policy and enforcement, which are the authority to hold an undocumented immigrant. That's our main topic. The second huge issue is the Trump administration has decided that if you don't participate in this program that ICE offers, they're going to revoke your grant funds. And as of today, that hasn't happened. In order to really answer the question and talk about the topic, what I'd like to do is take you on the path of an arrest. So Scott told us we have a police department and a sheriff's office, and so now you know the difference. The police department, they're a traditional department. They handle all the 911 calls, the traffic in arrests. And when they make an arrest, they bring that person to our detention center to get booked and processed. That process takes around an hour or so, depending upon how busy it is. If you ask me that on a Friday night, it's probably around 4 or 5 hours. If it's Wednesday during the morning, it's probably an hour to process somebody. So, and I'm going to read this verbatim. Our police department does not detain, monitor, interview, or investigate anyone solely for immigration purposes. So that's important for you to know, that our police department isn't out there checking green card, our statuses, or any type of identification just solely for immigration purposes. So once an arrest is made, they bring the person to the detention facility. And that process consists of a pat-down search, fingerprints, photographs, and the police officer actually has to go in front of a magistrate to tell the magistrate what probable cause they had in order to make that arrest. So there's somewhat of an accountability system right there. I want you to remember that. Once that probable cause hearing is done, the fingerprints, the photographs are all taken, and the person is booked into our system. The police officer then takes the subject back to the magistrate for what's called a bond hearing. And based upon whether or not the person is, what they're charged with, where they live, do they have a job, the magistrate will actually either place a bond on the person, allow them to make bond, post bond, in order to get out of jail and return to court at a separate date, or they'll give us a commitment document signed by that magistrate and place them in our custody. And some, he'll give what's called a personal recognizance form and tell them the actual date, the court date that they need to respond to, and let them out of our facility. Okay, are you with me? All right. If the person stays in our custody, the magistrate has signed a document authorizing us to keep that person, okay? During that process, we have to fingerprint that person. That fingerprint system is done electronically through what we call live scan system. And basically what it is a big machine that has a monitor and a glass, little piece of glass where you roll the fingerprints on, and that information is sent electronically to the state police. The state police then forwards that information to the FBI. FBI forwards that information to Immigration Customs Enforcement, okay? We don't ask anybody at the time of booking whether they're documented or not. We don't participate in that. But based upon that query to the state police, they send us information back to let us know whether they're wanted for anything. In other words, if you're wanted in Texas for a crime, we would get that information from the Visa NCIC is what it's called, and it would tell us whether or not that person is wanted for a crime in another state. Part of that system that the state police has that we're mandated to follow is the immigration check. And when a person comes back with a person comes back that ICE wants, they'll send us what's called a request to hold that person. And that's where the controversy begins. Do we have the authority to hold that person in our custody? And the argument is that document is not signed by a judge, a magistrate, or a clerk like our warrants are. So do we have that authority to hold that person? In 2015, actually in 2014, the Sheriff of Virginia Beach, Ken Stawley, asked our Attorney General that question. Our Attorney General said, that document does not give us the authority to hold an undocumented immigrant in our custody beyond what they are in there for, beyond the local charges that they're in there for. You guys with me? The controversy is going all across the United States, and it's created a huge issue on both sides. This is our process, and the sheriff would tell you at this point, regardless of her political view, she has to uphold the law. So what we do in Arlington is, once that request is made, we'll take that piece of paper and put it in the subject's, we call it a record jacket. And 48 hours prior to the release of that subject, we'll contact ICE. We'll give them a heads up that this person's leaving, okay? And if you want this subject, he'll be leaving at this time, you come pick him up, okay? What jurisdictions across America are doing is they're holding that person beyond the local charges for up to 48 hours. That's the controversy. Do they have the authority to do that? Well, our county board, our Attorney General says no. So that's one of the main issues, and we already covered the grant. As of right now, they haven't restricted any grant funding for the sheriff's office or the police department as it pertains to this issue. So, and I'll answer all your questions. I encourage you to come take a tour of the county jail. It's like no other. It looks nice from the outside, but I can assure you that it's different on the inside. Thank you.
As everybody gets settled up here, we'll now begin our question and answer period.
Christine Gregory. I'd like to know, David, do you have to report people in jail if they are to the federal government, to ICE?
In 2009, the state police entered into an agreement that basically forced us to report undocumented people. So to answer your question, yes, we have to report.
I'm a little confused. You said we have to report. I understand that you have to send the fingerprints, right? Now, the question I have is, after you send the fingerprints, from what I hear, is that, you know, ICE may get back to you and say, hold that person. The question I have for you is, given your experience in the jail, the concerns from the community deal, driving without a license, maybe driving intoxicated or not having, the registration or whatever other problem they may have with traffic violations. Are those violations, if they go to the registrar, typically the registrars decide that they have to stay in jail and they have to be fingerprinted for those offenses?
Okay, it was a two-part question. The first question, let me clarify again. The sheriff's office doesn't actually call up ICE and say, hey, we have this person in custody, okay? In 2009, the state police, through an agreement that we had no part of, mandated that through the National Crime Information Center and the Virginia Crime Information Center, it seeks information through the FBI to ICE, okay? So during that process, which is the fingerprint process, the state code says we have to take those fingerprints. So we don't directly call ICE to notify them that we have somebody in custody. They tell us that we have a person that they're interested in and they're in our custody. That's how that works. The second question is, people come to jail for Class 1 misdemeanors or felonies. Your lower crime, like traffic laws, things like that, they're not coming to jail for. They're getting a summons by the police department and released on the street right there. So in order for them to come to our facility, they had to have committed some sort of serious crime. Does that help?
Yeah, it's just that I know people that had a drivers while intoxicated and actually got, had to be in jail and was sent to.
That's a pretty serious crime, yeah.
Was sent to ICE. That's it.
So I think there's one more question, though, which maybe hasn't been answered yet, which is that, the jail is a building with a lock on the door, right? And lots of locks inside. And if I come to the jail and say, I've got Patrick Hope in there, I'd like to take him with me, you will laugh in my face, right? And so if an ICE officer comes to the jail and says, you got Patrick Hope in there, I'd like to take him with me, and they don't have any piece of paper that's signed by a judge, whether it's a federal judge or a state judge, why are they allowed through the locked door to do that? Why aren't they told, you know what, you want to wait outside the front door and pick him up? That's all right, we can't stop you from doing that, but we're not going to let you through this locked door just like we would let anyone else through this locked door. So I think that's the question that the sheriffs, both in Arlington and also in Fairfax, et cetera, need to really be thinking about right now.
I lived out of the country for a while also, Brian, and where I met my wife, Catherine. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon. She was an American diplomat. We are lucky in Arlington, and immigrants are lucky to have people in positions of power, such as the Commonwealth Attorney and the County Board and the Sheriff's Department, Beth Arthur, to enforce laws and to help people. My concern is whether we can do more to help people, given that until recently, with the last election, we were a country that said, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, the wretched rest of your free stretched shores. Send them, the homeless, them is tossed to me. Can we do better than that since we've had a change of occupant at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue?
I mean, so one of the big things about that we didn't get a chance to talk about is within the immigration system, there's no right to a public defender, right, to legal counsel. You can have a lawyer, but you got to pay for it, and then you cheat, right? So if I'm walking out of here with a small bag of marijuana and I get caught, I have the right to a public, right, and I'm under a certain income level, I have a right to a public defender, right, in the criminal process paid for by the taxpayers of the Commonwealth of Virginia. But if I'm facing deportation to a country where I haven't been in 8 years and is now the murder capital of the world with a higher homicide rate than Iraq and Afghanistan, I have no right whatsoever to a public defender. And as a result, most people don't get representation, right? Because the nonprofits like mine are completely underwater. The private attorneys charge an arm and a leg, And so most people just sort of try to go through the system themselves. A number of jurisdictions are starting to essentially say, all right, well, we're gonna step up and cover what the federal government is not doing. Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., Baltimore have all put a certain amount of money towards essentially basically trying to create, not exactly a public defender service, but basically legal representation for immigrants who are in deportation proceedings and would like to have a lawyer to fight those deportation proceedings and otherwise can't afford to. So I'm really pleased to announce that Arlington County is the first jurisdiction, south of the Potomac River, is the first jurisdiction in the South to do just that. Arlington County has put its money where its mouth is when it comes to this sort of thing, and has the board allocated $100,000, which is enough money for one full-time attorney whose job it will be to provide legal information and education about immigration matters, and also directly represent Arlingtonians who are facing deportation proceedings. So that's a really positive thing that Arlington is actually doing in terms of trying to pick up some of the slack of where the federal government is really falling behind.
Hi, I'm John Craig. I was wondering, please, if one of you might define briefly what a sanctuary city is and what Arlington's status in that regard is or might be.
Well, I'll answer the first half of the question, and I'll let you answer the second half of the question vis-a-vis Arlington. There's no such thing as a sanctuary city, right, as a legal concept. If you look in Title 8 of the U.S. Code, which is the Immigration and Nationality Act, those two words do not appear, right? It's a political concept. It's an organizing concept. Both sides use it, right, as a political concept. You know, the sort of pro-immigrant uses it as like, we should all be sanctuary cities, and the anti-immigrant side uses it as, these sanctuary cities are terrible. But there is actually no such thing, and so therefore the definition of it is whatever you want it to be, right? So personally, I don't actually use the term. I prefer to talk about specific policies of cooperation or non-cooperation with ICE. But how many such policies do you actually have to become a sanctuary city? 3, 5, 7? That's completely up to you. So when Attorney General Sessions announced the first anti-sanctuary city policy, San Francisco filed a lawsuit, and they won the lawsuit and the judge said this policy is void on vagueness grounds because no one knows really what you're talking about because there is no such thing as a sanctuary city, so no jurisdiction can actually tell whether they're subject to being defunded or not. So the second time around, when Sessions sort of again put forth this policy, instead of sort of organizing it around the term sanctuary cities, he talked about specific, if you don't do this one particular thing with regards to holding immigrants for 48 hours, then we're going to defund you. That's not actually happened yet. That is also subject to legal challenge. That's going to play its way out in the courts. But so that's a very long-winded way of answering your question as to what is a sanctuary city. It's whatever you want it to be. So with regards to what Arlington does, I'll let you.
I'll just add to that. It's really a label, just like you said. And when you use that label, sanctuary city, it kind of infers that we're shielding people from that immigration process. And we don't want to give that impression to the people in Arlington. So again, we kind of strayed away from, again, it's just a label to us as far as it goes along.
Yeah, I'm Charlie Clark. I was wondering, with the school system and the legal community, how much resistance have you heard from average people who may support the Trump view or may feel that there needs to be some kind of crackdown? I mean, do you hear any of that feeling, or is it sort of unanimous in Arlington that we need to resist that?
Well, from the perspective of registration, right, let's look at that way. We continue to enroll our students that we have done in the past, and we have not received any complaints from anybody about allowing to register our students in the regular way that we do. So from Arlington Public Schools, no, we have not received any, guidance as to, what we should do or not should do about immigration.
First, what is the federal government's argument that the state of Virginia does have the authority to hold these people after the magistrate says that they don't? And how many states have agreed with the federal government's position?
I can't answer the second part. I just don't know the answer. I can speak on behalf of Virginia. The federal government's argument is that document that they give us to hold an undocumented immigrant is legal and binding. The problem is again, it's not signed by any judge. There's no due process there. Sometimes, I've heard this before, sometimes the undocumented immigrant doesn't see a judge for weeks at a time. So is that a fair process? But their argument is that document is legal and binding, and you disagree with that.
With this additional holding, there's going to be additional costs, I assume. Who is paying for that, the Arlington citizens or ICE?
That's a good question, Gail. Since we don't hold those prisoners beyond what the local charges are, there is no cost to taxpayers.
I wonder if I could ask for a little bit further clarification about the requirement or the mandate. If I understand correctly, what you're saying is that 48 hours before an individual will be released, the county calls ICE and says, we'll give you 48 hours to come and pick up this individual. Is it the county's position that that is mandatory? And if not, why is it that the sheriff has decided to voluntarily cooperate with ICE in this way?
Well, the sheriff's office has great relationships with all our federal agencies. FBI, DEA, ATF, ICE, and she has decided to, once that request has been made, honor that request, and that's to notify them when that person is released from our custody. So we do that.
I think that we're in an era where a lot of old agreements and old assumptions need to at least be revisited. Under the Obama administration, ICE had clearly defined priority lists, right? There's priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, priority 4. And you can disagree as to whether they had the right priority list, but it was quite clear that the way that they did immigration enforcement was based on priority lists. Basically, the very first thing that the Trump administration did as soon as they came into office on immigration was to throw those priority lists out the window and put out a memo that quite explicitly says, basically everyone's a priority, right? And so when everyone's a priority, it's like when you get a used textbook where every single sentence is highlighted, and if everyone's a priority, then no one's a priority, right? And so given that we're in a context in which they're really being much more indiscriminate in terms of the folks that were going after them before, they're much more trying to just throw a blanket rather than sort of, pick off the people that they would consider their priorities because they're gang members or the most dangerous criminals, what have you. I think there's a lot of assumptions that, and a lot of agreements that existed under the previous administration that we really need to think hard whether those agreements should continue to exist given the way immigration enforcement is being carried out by this administration. And the Sheriff of Fairfax has gotten in quite a bit of trouble for this because she actually has a formal contract with ICE, unlike Arlington, which has basically sort of an informal agreement. In Fairfax, they have a formal contract with ICE, and she sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, sort of blithely renewed it in, I think, March of this year, sort of without really thinking, like, is this something that under the current administration, federal administration, under the current situation, we should renew? And now she's getting a lot of heat in Fairfax County for this. So Arlington does not have a formal contract of that nature, and I think that's great, and I hope they don't enter into a contract of this nature. But even to the extent that there are informal agreements and informal sort of ways things have been done in the past, I think someone needs to really sit down hard and think whether they should continue to do things in that way.
Question, I guess, for the sheriff's office. You've been talking about the fingerprinting, et cetera, of when someone is being booked. As I understand previously, when you send the records to the FBI, it's not only it's ICE, but it's also to see if there are other warrants that might be outstanding in another state. What happens under the circumstances if, for example, one individual, you find out there's a warrant for his arrest for some type of crime in Nebraska? What type of paperwork do you get back from the FBI? And is it similar to the paper that you get from ICE? And what do you do with it in terms of, does it have a signature and all of that?
A very good question. I'm glad you brought it up. It's different. When we call this an administrative message, and so when we actually put in the information in the computer and it sends out this national crime search through the FBI, they send us back information that says this person is wanted for homicide in Texas, okay? And we notify that local jurisdiction in Texas to verify that this is true, and they still have an active warrant on there. The warrant that they have is signed by a judge. Okay, that's the difference. And so what happens is they send us a copy of the warrant, we verify it, and then we take them in front of the magistrate, and they go through an extradition process through our system in order to get removed from Arlington back to Texas to face charges. So the difference and the key to this is there's a warrant signed by a judge.
And my question is in regards to the students of Arlington County. So what community resources are we reaching out to for particularly DACA Dreamer kids? And are we bringing them into schools, or are we expecting parents who are already in difficult situations to go out and get these resources on their own?
So, most families do feel uncomfortable sharing their situation, right? So many, we want, like I said at the beginning, we want their parents to come in and let us know that there's a need. But many times they do not feel comfortable and they do not let us know. So it could be, for example, that our counselors find out that a student is in need. And it could be many needs. It could be the immigration. But when you talk about the immigrant community, you have a range of issues. So it could be emotional issues that are happening, it could be substance abuse, it could be transportation. So if it is from the school, we will get our social workers to help out the families, and they will go to the resources where they need that. We have field counselors, so they speak, different languages. We will be able to try to translate, and figure out how to help them out. So I think that we see them more as an individual case, rather than, put them in a bowl. I want to think of, my perspective is from the student services, that we look at the humanity and we look at each individual and what is their need. So I do, and every kid has different issues. I was talking to the field counsel, Lourdes Rubio, who's here, and she was sharing to me that many of the students are experiencing a tremendous amount of anxiety and fear, right? So in that case, we're trying to put them together and talk to them. And then, how do you deal with fear? How do you deal with anxiety? We can run groups. We can help them out. So, to the extent that we know, we'll be able to provide the services that we need. And if we need to refer them, we'll look, I know counselors, I know, our staff is so caring. They will walk with the students and go to court with them, to try to figure out how to help them out. If they need food, they will go and take them food. So our schools are very fortunate. We have people that, our staff care very much about each individual family, and they will try to best fit their need according to the resources that we can offer.
I appreciate your clarifying what is authorized and what it is not. If there's a warrant signed by a judge, person detained, right? So the detainers for folks who might be deemed to be undocumented are not legally binding. And that's been debated and so on, but the cases and law and all that in court have been found that they're not legally binding. So then a due process for someone that's detained calls for releasing the person if there isn't anything that has the authority to detain that person. So now my question for you is, the sheriff and anybody else wants to chime in. The prison system in this country is incentivized by money. There's a big deal of the whole prison industry and so on. And one of the things that was found in terms of detaining those jurisdictions that were holding people for the longest time is that they would look for the federal government money, the reimbursement for the cost and the length of time that the person was kept. And some jurisdictions were being reimbursed right away, which was the exception. And most jurisdictions took a while to get them. A while back we found out that Arlington was one of those.
Walter, can you come to your question, please?
Right away. So my question is, at the time we found out it was being reimbursed fairly quickly we didn't know if it had something to do with that the head of ICE lived in Arlington. And so what are the numbers that you have, and what is the money, and do you have numbers for folks detained in Arlington, and what is the amount of funds that are involved in the detention process for folks who might be undocumented, which usually are folks who have not committed a felony.
Thank you.
Other type of crime, other type of detention.
We've had many conversations with Walter about this over the years. If you asked me this 8 years ago, we were making 196, give or take a few pennies, $196 per day per inmate. Okay, and it made a lot of money. Today, since we don't hold ICE inmates, we're not making any money. So the money's not there. We no longer hold ICE inmates, and I was trying to put an exact date on that, but our ICE folks built a facility in Farmville, and once that facility was up and running, they took all their inmates, detainees they call them, down to Farmville instead of putting them in our custody. So we no longer hold them past the local charge.
All right, I know many more questions in the room, but that's all the time we have. A handful of important announcements and then a couple of thank yous. So first, as I mentioned, this is the first in a two-part series, because clearly much more to discuss. Part 2, we did government response today. Part 2, we'll look at the community response, and we're going to talk to organizations specifically that serve in the immigrant community and organizations that are general welfare organizations but have also felt the impact of these changes. This will be our November program. So that will be our second Wednesday of the month, which will be the 8th of November. We're going to be meeting at the Arlington Career Center on South Walter Reed Drive for that one, so not here. If you are a guest, when you came in, you should have seen a sign-in sheet on the front door. If not, I do have a clipboard that I meant to bring up as a prop but forgot. But please do sign in because we want to make sure we get you that information so you can join us in November. Now, that program is in 2 months' time, not because we are taking October off, but because we will be having a program in October that looks ahead to November's election, the day before our November meeting. And that is going to be a forum with the 3 county board and 3 school board candidates. So that will be back here at Marymount on the 11th of October. Same bad time, same bad channel, but please do sign up. You will get all that information. We look forward to seeing you then. I'd like everyone please to join me in thanking our 3 speakers, Simon Sandoval-Moshenberg, Laura Newton, and David Kidwell.